The crimson lights pierced through the humid Louisiana evening as Dr. Maya Washington pulled her rental sedan to the shoulder of the winding bayou road, never imagining that a simple drive to collect her nephew's college acceptance letter would transform a distinguished Air Force colonel into a symbol of resistance against a conspiracy that reached from the shadows of small-town corruption all the way to the marble halls of the Supreme Court. But Deputies Marcus Thibodaux and Jake Broussard had no idea they were about to ignite a firestorm that would expose a network so vast and so deeply embedded in American institutions that it would shake the very foundations of democracy itself. Because the woman they dismissed as Colonel Uppity had actually earned her eagles through 3 decades of military service across 4 continents, commanding drone operations that had saved countless American lives. And when she activated the emergency beacon embedded in her military-issued smartwatch, she wasn't just alerting Langley Air Force Base. She was triggering a cascade of events that would uncover a shadow organization stretching from Louisiana's parish politics to the highest echelons of federal power, proving that sometimes the most crucial battles for America's soul are fought not in distant war zones, but on the forgotten back roads where justice goes to die. Just before we continue, I'd love to know what state you're watching from today. And if these stories of courage inspire you, make sure you hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode reveals a conspiracy so shocking, it'll change how you see American politics forever. The Louisiana sun hung like molten copper over the cypress swamps as Dr. Maya Washington guided her rental car through the familiar curves of Highway 182, heading toward the small town of Broussard where she'd grown up. The air conditioning hummed quietly as Spanish moss draped from ancient oak trees created a natural cathedral along the roadside. After 30 years in the Air Force, she'd flown missions over Afghanistan's mountains and Iraq's deserts, but this stretch of Louisiana bayou country still felt like the center of her universe. At 54, Maya carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from commanding respect in rooms full of generals and senators. Her natural hair was cut in a professional style that worked equally well under a military cap or at a Pentagon briefing. Today, she wore simple khakis and a navy blue blouse, a stark contrast to the pressed uniforms that usually defined her presence in Washington's corridors of power. The rental car's GPS guided her through neighborhoods where she'd ridden her bicycle as a child, past the elementary school where she'd first dreamed of flying, and toward the modest house where her brother Marcus still lived with his family. The town had grown some since her childhood, with a new Walmart and a cluster of chain restaurants near the interstate, but the core of Broussard remained unchanged. Weathered shotgun houses lined streets named after Confederate generals, while newer subdivisions sprawled toward the wetlands where her grandfather had taught her to fish. Aunt Maya. The front door burst open before she could even turn off the engine, and 18-year-old Malik Washington bounded down the porch steps with the enthusiasm of youth. His acceptance letter to Howard University's engineering program had arrived that morning, and the family had been celebrating since dawn. "Look at you," Maya said, embracing her nephew with genuine warmth. "College man now. Your mama must be beside herself with pride." "She's been crying happy tears all day," Malik laughed, his voice carrying the musical cadence of Louisiana French that still colored the speech of old families in the parish. "Says I'm the first Washington to go to college since you went to the Air Force Academy." Inside the house, the celebration was in full swing. Marcus had taken the day off from his job at the chemical plant, and their sister Celeste had driven down from Baton Rouge with her twin daughters. The kitchen table groaned under the weight of traditional Louisiana fare, jambalaya, red beans and rice, fresh cornbread, and a king cake that Celeste had somehow convinced a bakery to make in July. "Colonel Washington," Marcus said with mock formality as he embraced his sister. "Still saving the world one drone strike at a time." "One mission at a time," Maya replied, the same response she'd given for decades. But here, surrounded by family photos and the smell of her mother's recipes, she wasn't Colonel Washington. She was just Maya, the girl who'd climbed the old cypress tree in the backyard and dreamed of touching the sky. They spent hours catching up on family news, Malik's college plans, and Celeste's work as a nurse practitioner in the state capitol. Maya listened more than she spoke, savoring the normalcy of it all. In Washington, she was Dr. Washington, the Air Force's leading expert on unmanned aerial systems, the woman who briefed presidents and testified before Congress. Here, she was simply the aunt who sent birthday cards and Christmas presents, who remembered every graduation and achievement. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Malik mentioned that he'd forgotten to pick up his official transcripts from his high school guidance counselor. "I'm such an idiot," he said, shaking his head. "Howard needs them by tomorrow, and Mrs. Boudreau said she'd stay late today to make sure I got them." "Don't worry about it," Maya said, standing up and reaching for her keys. "I'll run over and get them." "Which building?" "The main office at Beau Rivage High." "But you don't have to. It's no trouble at all. I could use a drive anyway." She smiled at her nephew. "Besides, can't have my favorite nephew missing his college deadline because of paperwork." The drive through town stirred memories at every turn. She passed the church where she'd been confirmed, the corner store where she'd bought penny candy with her allowance, and the small park where she'd had her first kiss. Beau Rivage had always been a place where everyone knew everyone, where your family's reputation followed you for generations, and where the color of your skin still determined which neighborhoods you could afford to live in. Beau Rivage High School sat on a sprawling campus that had been built in the 1990s when oil money had flowed freely through the parish. Maya collected the transcripts from Mrs. Boudreau, who remembered her from her own high school days and beamed with pride when Maya mentioned her military service. "Your mama would be so proud," Mrs. Boudreau said, echoing words Maya had heard countless times since returning home. "A colonel in our little town. Who would have thought?" Maya accepted the praise graciously, signed the necessary paperwork, and headed back to her car as the sun began to set over the bayou. She chose the scenic route home, driving past sugar cane fields and old plantation houses that had been converted into bed and breakfasts for tourists seeking authentic southern charm. The irony wasn't lost on her that some of the same families who had once owned her ancestors now marketed their heritage as quaint history. The first sign of trouble appeared in her rearview mirror about 15 minutes into the drive. A parish sheriff's cruiser had materialized behind her, keeping pace but maintaining distance. Maya checked her speedometer automatically. She was doing exactly 45 in a 45 zone, her military precision extending even to civilian driving. Her situational awareness, honed by years of combat operations, kicked in immediately. The cruiser stayed behind her for another mile, then another. Maya felt her shoulders tense despite her attempts to remain calm. She'd experienced this before, the feeling of being watched, followed, judged. It never got easier, even after 3 decades of commanding respect in the world's most powerful military. The red and blue lights erupted suddenly, cutting through the peaceful evening like a siren's wail. Maya's heart sank, but her training took over. She pulled over safely, activated her hazard lights, and placed her hands on the steering wheel where they would be clearly visible. Her military ID was in her wallet, her rental agreement in the glove compartment, everything properly documented and legal. 2 deputies approached her vehicle, their flashlights creating harsh circles of light in the gathering darkness. The older deputy, a heavy-set Cajun man with graying hair and a face weathered by decades in the Louisiana sun, took the lead. His nameplate read, Thibodaux. His partner, younger and leaner with the kind of swagger that suggested he had something to prove, hung back slightly. Broussard was embroidered on his uniform shirt. "Ma'am, I need you to step out of the vehicle," Thibodaux said without preamble, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. His Cajun accent was thick, but his tone was unmistakably confrontational. Maya kept her voice calm and respectful, the way she'd been taught by her father and reinforced by military training. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped?" "I was observing the speed limit and—" "I said step out of the vehicle," Thibodaux repeated, his hand moving to rest on his weapon in a gesture that was clearly meant to intimidate. "Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be, Cher." The casual endearment, which in other circumstances might have been friendly, carried an unmistakable undertone of condescension. Maya had heard that tone before, the way some people spoke to children or pets, reducing her to something less than human. "Sir, I'd like to understand the reason for the stop before." "We've had reports of a stolen vehicle matching this description," Broussard interjected, though his voice lacked conviction. Silver sedan, Louisiana plates, driven by a black female. Maya felt the familiar burn of injustice, but kept her expression neutral. Officers, this is a rental car. I have all the documentation. May I retrieve it from my purse? Thibodaux stepped closer to the window, his flashlight beam hitting her face directly. Real slow, and keep your hands where I can see them. Maya reached carefully for her purse, producing her driver's license, military ID, and rental agreement. She handed them through the window with steady hands, noting how Thibodaux barely glanced at the documents before passing them to Broussard. Says here she's military, Broussard said quietly, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty. Yeah, right, Thibodaux scoffed, his laugh harsh and ugly. Step out of the vehicle, ma'am. Now. Officer Thibodaux, I'm Colonel Dr. Maya Washington, United States Air Force. These documents verify my identity and... Thibodaux's laughter cut her off. Colonel. You. He looked at Broussard with exaggerated disbelief. Can you believe this? Colonel Uppity here thinks she's something special. Maya climbed out of the car slowly, her dignity intact despite the humiliation. Officers, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. If you'll just verify my credentials. Turn around, Thibodaux ordered, hands behind your back. This is unnecessary, Maya said, but she complied. The handcuffs clicked into place, cold metal against her wrists. I've identified myself as a United States military officer. I'm requesting to contact my commanding officer. Yeah, right, Colonel Uppity, Thibodaux repeated, clearly enjoying his cruel joke. You just sit tight. We'll sort this all out at the station. From across the road, hidden behind a cluster of cypress trees draped with Spanish moss, a young black man named Darius Boudreaux watched the scene unfold with growing horror. He was walking home from his job at the marina when he'd heard the commotion. What he saw made his blood run cold, a black woman, clearly no threat to anyone, being handcuffed and humiliated by two white deputies. Darius pulled out his phone and started recording, his hands shaking with anger and fear. He'd grown up in Beau Rivage, and he knew the stories. He knew what happened to people who looked like him when they crossed certain lines, when they witnessed things they weren't supposed to see. Hey! Thibodaux shouted, having spotted the phone's light. Boy, what do you think you're doing over there? Just walking home, sir, Darius called back, trying to keep his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. Get over here. Now. Darius approached reluctantly, still holding his phone. I wasn't doing nothing wrong, sir. Thibodaux grabbed the phone from his hands and examined it with the casual brutality of someone who knew he could act with impunity. You recording us? It's my right to. The phone hit the asphalt with a sickening crunch as Thibodaux threw it down and stomped on it with his heavy boot. Oops, he said with a cruel smile. Accidents happen. Now get out of here before you have your own accident. Darius looked at the shattered remains of his phone, then at Maya, who met his eyes with a look that seemed to say, remember this. He nodded slightly and melted back into the darkness, but not before memorizing every detail of what he'd witnessed. As they loaded Maya into the back of the patrol car, she activated the emergency function on her military-issued smartwatch. The device sent an encrypted signal directly to Langley Air Force Base's Emergency Communication Center, a protocol reserved for the highest-ranking officers in extreme situations. The signal would trigger immediate action from people who understood that when a colonel activated emergency protocols, the situation was serious. The ride to the parish jail was silent except for the crackling of the police radio and the occasional comment from Thibodaux about uppity types who don't know their place. Maya stared out the window at the familiar streets of her hometown, now transformed into something alien and hostile. The irony wasn't lost on her, she'd served her country in war zones around the world, only to be treated like a criminal in the place where she'd first learned to love America. At Langley Air Force Base, the emergency alert triggered immediate action. Captain Maria Santos, the duty officer in the communication center, stared at her screen in disbelief. The signal indicated a code black situation, a high-ranking officer in immediate danger. She immediately contacted General Patricia Hayes, the base commander, who was reviewing intelligence reports in her office. "Ma'am, we've received a code black signal from Colonel Washington," Santos reported, her voice tight with concern. General Hayes looked up sharply. "Maya Washington? Where's the signal originating?" "Louisiana, ma'am. Small town called Broussard. The signal cut out after the initial burst." "Get me Major Rodriguez," Hayes ordered, her mind already racing through possibilities. "And prep a jet. If Maya Washington is in trouble, we respond with everything we have." Major Elena Rodriguez had been reviewing after-action reports when her secure phone buzzed. The message was simple but urgent: Phoenix Wing Conference Room. Now. Elena had served under Maya Washington in Afghanistan, where the colonel had personally led a rescue mission that saved Elena's entire unit after they'd been pinned down by Taliban fighters. She owed her life to Maya's quick thinking and steady leadership. If her former commander was in trouble, Elena would move heaven and earth to help her. At the Broussard parish jail, Maya was processed with deliberate humiliation. Sergeant Louise Tran, the desk officer, barely looked up as Thibodaux filled out the paperwork with obvious satisfaction. "What's the charge?" Tran asked in a bored tone. "Suspected vehicle theft, resisting arrest, and failure to cooperate with a lawful investigation," Thibodaux rattled off. Maya said nothing as they took her fingerprints and mugshot. The other deputies in the station seemed to find the situation amusing, making comments just loud enough for her to hear. "Looks like somebody thought she was too good for a simple traffic stop," one said. "Probably thinks she's some kind of CEO or something," another added with a laugh. They placed her in a holding cell that smelled of bleach and desperation. The radio in the main area played Zydeco music, adding a surreal soundtrack to her humiliation. Maya sat on the narrow bench and closed her eyes, centering herself the way she'd learned in survival training. Through it all, she maintained her dignity. She knew who she was, regardless of how they chose to see her. She'd served her country with honor for 3 decades, commanded thousands of airmen, and earned the respect of generals and presidents alike. No small-town bigot could take that away from her. As the minutes ticked by, she glanced at her watch and whispered to herself, "They're coming." Miles away, General Hayes was boarding a military jet, her jaw set with determination. Nobody treated one of her officers this way. The flight to Louisiana would take less than 2 hours, but every minute felt like an eternity. The mountain air in Afghanistan had been thin and cold that October morning in 2019, but Maya Washington had barely noticed. Her focus was entirely on the mission, extracting wounded soldiers from a Taliban ambush that had gone sideways fast. The memory played in vivid detail as she sat in the holding cell. She'd been a lieutenant colonel then, leading a special operations unit through hostile territory when they'd received the distress call. A convoy had been hit by an IED, followed by coordinated small arms fire. Multiple casualties, including several critical. "Phoenix Base, this is Eagle 6, she'd radioed back to headquarters. "We're moving to assist. Estimate arrival in 15 minutes. Her team had moved with practiced precision through the rocky terrain, using drone surveillance to map enemy positions and create an extraction corridor. That's when she'd found her, a young major trapped under an overturned Humvee, her leg crushed and bleeding badly. "Stay with me, soldier," Maya had said, working quickly to stabilize her while bullets whined overhead. "What's your name?" "Rodriguez, ma'am." Elena Rodriguez, she'd gasped through gritted teeth. "Well, Major Rodriguez, today's not your day to die." Maya had personally carried her to the extraction point, refusing to let anyone else take the burden despite the ongoing firefight. Elena had recovered fully, and their paths had crossed many times since. She'd risen through the ranks to become one of the Air Force's most trusted intelligence officers, but she'd never forgotten the debt she owed to Maya Washington. Now, in the Langley Secure Communications Center, Elena was working that debt with everything she had. "Ma'am, I've got nothing in the public databases," she reported to General Hayes via secure video link. The general was still in flight, her jaw tight with controlled anger. "No arrest records, no booking information. Either she hasn't been processed yet, or someone's keeping it quiet." "What about satellite coverage?" Hayes asked. "I'm accessing DoD surveillance assets now. Small town like Beau Rivage shouldn't be hard to map." Elena's fingers flew across multiple keyboards, calling up resources that most people didn't know existed. "Ma'am, I'm seeing her rental car at the parish jail. Confirmed location. Any indication of her condition?" "Negative, ma'am. But the fact that she activated the Code Black protocol tells us everything we need to know." Back in Beau Rivage, Maya's situation was being observed by someone unexpected. Deputy Camille Tran had been on duty when they'd brought the woman in, and something about the entire scene bothered her. Camille was new to the force, barely 8 months out of the academy, but she'd grown up in Beau Rivage and knew the difference between actual police work and harassment. She'd noticed the woman's military bearing, the way she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the circumstances. More importantly, she'd noticed the tattoos. During processing, Camille had caught glimpses of military insignia tattooed on the woman's arm, not the kind of amateur work you'd see on wannabes, but professional pieces that spoke of real service. There was an Air Force Wings tattoo, a Special Operations crest, and what looked like campaign ribbons from multiple deployments. Deputy Tran, Thibodaux called out from the break room where he and Broussard were holding court with several other deputies. "Come here for a minute." Camille approached reluctantly. She'd learned to be wary of Thibodaux's moods, especially when he was feeling proud of himself. "You see that woman we brought in?" Thibodaux asked, gesturing toward the holding area with his coffee cup. "Yes, sir. That's what happens when people think they're better than us," he continued, his voice carrying to the other deputies. "Think they can just drive around in stolen cars and mouth off to police officers." "Sir, her documentation seemed to be in order," Camille said carefully. "And she was cooperative during processing." Broussard looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Several other deputies nodded agreement with Thibodaux's assessment, but Camille noticed that none of them had actually been present during the arrest. "Documentation can be faked," Thibodaux said dismissively. "Point is, we put someone in their place tonight. Sent a message." The conversation troubled Camille enough that she found an excuse to walk past the holding cells later in her shift. The woman, who'd identified herself as Colonel Washington, sat perfectly still on the bench, her posture erect despite the uncomfortable accommodations. Their eyes met briefly, and Camille saw something that made her chest tight with recognition. It was the same look her grandfather had worn, a veteran's bearing that spoke of battles fought and responsibilities carried. Whatever else this woman might be, she was a soldier. "Sheriff Boudreaux, this is Deputy Director Hamilton from the governor's office," came the voice over his secure line. "We're getting inquiries about an arrest made by your department tonight. Can you clarify the situation?" Boudreaux, a career law enforcement officer who'd climbed the ranks through political savvy as much as police work, chose his words carefully. "We had a routine traffic stop that escalated when the suspect became uncooperative. Standard procedure was followed. The suspect claims to be a United States Air Force colonel." "Sir, we get all kinds of claims. Mental health issues, drug impairment, people trying to avoid consequences for their actions. My deputies followed protocol." "I see. Well, keep this quiet for now. We don't need unnecessary attention on local law enforcement." What Boudreaux didn't mention was that he'd already received 4 calls from Pentagon officials, each one more insistent than the last. Something about this arrest was different, and his instincts told him to prepare for a storm. Miles away in his cramped apartment, Darius Boudreaux was discovering that his broken phone might not be the end of his story. His cousin Marcus, a computer science student at Louisiana State University, had managed to recover the phone's memory card from the shattered remains. "Bro, you're not going to believe this," Marcus said, hunched over his laptop. "Your phone was backing up to the cloud in real time. The video's all here. Darius watched the footage with growing amazement. The quality was grainy, but the audio was clear enough to understand the conversation. More importantly, the video clearly showed a woman being handcuffed without any sign of resistance or threat. "We need to do something with this," Darius said. "Already on it," Marcus replied, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "I'm uploading to every platform I can think of. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. Hashtag Lady in Cuffs." The video began spreading immediately, shared and reshared by accounts across social media. Within hours, it had been viewed thousands of times, though nobody yet knew the identity of the woman in handcuffs. Back at Langley, Elena was making disturbing discoveries. Her cybersecurity contacts had confirmed that the Broussard Parish Sheriff's Department security footage from the evening had been wiped. All of it, not just the arrest footage. "That's not accidental," Elena reported to General Hayes, who had landed at a military airfield outside New Orleans and was driving toward Broussard in an unmarked vehicle. "Someone with technical knowledge deliberately scrubbed their servers. How long would that take? With the right access and tools, maybe 30 minutes. But ma'am, there's something else. I've been running background checks on the arresting deputies. Marcus Thibodaux has a history. For excessive force complaints in the past 6 years, all dismissed. And he's got social media accounts that are concerning." "How concerning?" "White nationalist adjacent. Nothing overtly criminal, but he follows accounts that promote race-based conspiracy theories, and he's been active on forums discussing urban threats and maintaining order." General Hayes's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was worse than she'd initially feared. At the parish jail, the night shift was winding down, but the tension remained high. Word had spread through the building that calls were coming in from state and federal officials asking questions about the evening's arrest. Sheriff Boudreaux had arrived personally, which was unusual for a routine booking. "There seemed to be some irregularities in the documentation," he announced to the deputies on duty. "I want everyone to be very careful about what they say regarding tonight's events. Any media inquiries are to be directed to me personally." Camille Tran felt her stomach drop. In her limited experience, that kind of warning usually meant someone had screwed up badly. Around 3 a.m., a quiet phone call came from someone at the State Attorney General's office. The conversation was brief and coded, but the message was clear: the woman needed to be released immediately and quietly. Boudreaux hung up the phone and stared at the wall for a long moment. Then he walked to the holding area himself. "Ma'am, you're free to go," he said through the bars. "Your vehicle is in the parking lot." Maya stood slowly, her dignity intact despite the night's ordeal. "Am I being charged with anything?" "No charges are being filed at this time." "I see. And my property?" Boudreaux handed over a plastic bag containing Maya's wallet, keys, and watch. "All accounted for." Maya checked the contents carefully, then looked directly at the sheriff. "No apology, Sheriff. Proper procedures were followed. You're free to go." As Maya walked through the station toward the exit, she passed the break room where several deputies sat in uncomfortable silence. Thibodaux was nowhere to be seen, but Broussard met her eyes briefly before looking away. Outside, the media had begun to gather. Word of the viral video had reached local news outlets, and reporters were starting to piece together the location. Maya emerged from the station to find 3 news vans and a small crowd of protesters who had materialized from social media calls. Cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, but Maya simply walked to her rental car with measured steps. She ignored the chaos, started the engine, and drove away into the pre-dawn darkness. 20 minutes later, she pulled into her brother's driveway to find every light in the house on. Marcus and Celeste rushed out before she could even turn off the engine. "Oh my God, Maya, we've been so worried," Celeste said, tears streaming down her face. "We saw the video online, and then the news said you were arrested, and..." Malik wrapped his arms around his aunt and wouldn't let go. "Are you okay?" Did they hurt you? Maya held her nephew close, feeling the anger and humiliation of the past few hours beginning to transform into something else. Determination. I'm fine, she said softly. But this was never about me, baby. It's about what's coming next. In the distance, the sound of helicopters could be heard approaching. General Hayes was 5 minutes out, and she was bringing the full weight of the United States Air Force with her. The small town that had tried to humiliate a colonel was about to discover exactly who they had crossed. The situation was becoming more complicated by the hour. At the state level, Sheriff Raymond Boudreaux of Beau Rivage Parish was fielding increasingly urgent calls from officials who normally wouldn't give his small department a second thought. The morning after Maya's release, Sheriff Raymond Boudreaux stood behind a podium in the Beau Rivage Parish government building, facing a room full of reporters and flashing cameras. He had called the press conference to control the narrative before it spiraled completely out of hand. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to address the events of last evening, Boudreaux began, his voice steady and authoritative. The Beau Rivage Parish Sheriff's Department conducted a routine traffic stop based on a reported stolen vehicle matching the description of the car in question. Standard procedures were followed throughout the encounter. A reporter from New Orleans raised her hand. Sheriff Boudreaux, the viral video shows what appears to be an unnecessary arrest of a cooperative individual. How do you respond to claims of racial profiling? Boudreaux's expression remained neutral. The video you're referring to shows only a small portion of the encounter. The individual in question was released after proper verification of her identity. We consider this matter closed. But what about reports that the arrested woman was actually a United States Air Force colonel? I cannot comment on the identity of individuals involved in ongoing investigations. What I can say is that this department treats all citizens equally, regardless of their claimed status or background. The word "claimed" was deliberate, designed to cast doubt on Maya's credentials. Boudreaux fielded a few more questions before ending the conference, but the damage to the narrative was already done. Social media exploded with outrage over his dismissive tone and refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing. Later that morning, a black sedan with government plates pulled up to Marcus Washington's house. Deputy Mayor Richard Comeau stepped out, adjusting his tie nervously. He was a career politician who had built his reputation on avoiding controversy, and this situation threatened to blow up in spectacular fashion. Celeste answered the door with obvious suspicion. Can I help you? Ma'am, I'm Deputy Mayor Comeau. I was hoping to speak with your sister about last night's unfortunate incident. Maya appeared behind Celeste, her expression unreadable. I'm Colonel Washington. What can I do for you? Comeau shifted uncomfortably under her steady gaze. Colonel, first, let me say how sorry I am about what happened. There's been a terrible misunderstanding, and the city would like to make things right. How exactly do you propose to do that? Well, we're prepared to offer a formal apology from the city, along with assurance that the deputies involved will receive additional training. We'd also be willing to discuss compensation for your inconvenience. Maya studied him for a long moment. Let me understand this correctly. You want me to accept an apology and some money, and in exchange, I quietly disappear and pretend this never happened. I wouldn't put it quite like that, but... Mr. Comeau, I've worn this uniform for 30 years. I've served my country in war zones around the world. I didn't do that so I could come home and be treated like a criminal in my own hometown. Her voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. That won't happen. Comeau left empty-handed, and Maya knew the real fight was just beginning. That afternoon, she made a call to an old contact, Jeremiah Thibodaux, a civil rights attorney with a reputation for taking on cases that other lawyers wouldn't touch. Ironically, he was a distant cousin of the deputy who had arrested her, a fact that added another layer of complexity to the situation. Jeremiah had a complicated past, having once worked for corporate interests before a crisis of conscience led him to advocacy work. Colonel Washington, Jeremiah said when he answered, I've been following your situation on the news. Hell of a thing. I need someone who's not afraid of a fight, Jeremiah. Are you interested? I'll be honest with you. They're going to come at you with everything they have. This isn't just about a traffic stop anymore. You've become a symbol, and symbols make powerful people nervous. Good, Maya replied. Maybe it's time some people got nervous. Jeremiah agreed to meet her the next day, but he warned her, they'll try to bury you, Colonel. Make sure you're ready for that. Meanwhile, the story was gaining national attention. Social media had identified Maya from military websites and news articles about her distinguished service record. The hashtag Lady in Cuffs evolved into hashtag Justice for Colonel, and support began pouring in from unexpected quarters. Black veterans organizations issued statements of support. Military families shared their own stories of discrimination. But the response wasn't uniformly positive. Alt-right websites and forums began spinning counter-narratives, painting Maya as part of a deep state conspiracy against local law enforcement. At the Beau-Rivage Parish Sheriff's Department, the atmosphere was increasingly tense. Deputy Camille Tran had been watching the news coverage with growing unease, particularly after she'd done her own research into Maya's military record. During her lunch break, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "I'm telling you, we sent exactly the right message," Thibodaux was saying to a group of deputies in the break room. "These uppity types need to understand that their fancy titles don't mean nothing in the real world." "Marcus, maybe you should keep your voice down," suggested Deputy Davis, glancing nervously around. "Why? We did our job. Some elite thinks she can just roll through our town like she owns the place. Not happening." Camille quietly activated the voice recorder on her phone, her hands shaking slightly. This wasn't just about a traffic stop. It was about deliberate targeting based on race and perceived status. "The sheriff's got our backs on this," Thibodaux continued. "He knows what really happened. Sometimes you got to put people in their place. Show them that badges still mean something." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Thibodaux making increasingly inflammatory comments about sending messages to the uppity elite. Camille captured it all, her disgust growing with every word. That evening, she sent the audio file to her college roommate Sarah Williams, who now worked as a journalist for the New Orleans Times-Picayune. The email was simple: "Sarah, you need to hear this. People need to know what really happened." While Camille was documenting the corruption in her own department, Major Elena Rodriguez was pursuing a different line of investigation at Langley. Her cybersecurity contacts had uncovered disturbing connections between Deputy Thibodaux and extremist online communities. "Ma'am, you need to see this," Elena told General Hayes as they reviewed intelligence reports. "Thibodaux's been active on a militia-connected website called Bayou Patriots. He's posted dozens of times about targeting high-profile figures who he considers threats to traditional values." "Define targeting," Hayes said grimly. "Posts about making examples of people who think they're above the law. There's discussion of coordinated harassment, economic pressure, and what they call street justice." Hayes studied the printed screenshots with growing alarm. "This suggests the arrest wasn't random." "No, ma'am, it wasn't. I've traced the web traffic patterns, and there's evidence that Thibodaux was researching Colonel Washington's family connections to Beau-Rivage weeks before her visit. He knew she was coming. The implications were staggering. This wasn't a case of racial profiling during a routine traffic stop. It was a deliberate ambush targeting a specific individual because of her race and status." "Get me everything you can on this Bayou Patriots group," Hayes ordered. "Financial records, membership lists, communication logs. I want to know who else is involved and how deep this goes." As Elena expanded her investigation, Maya was preparing for her first major media appearance. She had agreed to an interview with CNN's Anderson Cooper, despite warnings from some quarters that going public would only escalate the situation. The interview was conducted via satellite from a studio in New Orleans, with Maya maintaining her characteristic poise throughout. Cooper began with straightforward questions about the arrest, but Maya's responses elevated the conversation to broader themes. "This isn't about me personally," she said, looking directly into the camera. This is about a system that allows people in positions of authority to abuse that authority based on their personal prejudices. I took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath doesn't end just because I'm wearing civilian clothes in my hometown. Some critics have suggested that you're using your military rank to receive special treatment, Cooper pressed. Anderson, I didn't ask for special treatment. I asked for equal treatment under the law. The same treatment any citizen should expect when they're pulled over for no legitimate reason. Her voice remained calm, but her words carried weight. If demanding accountability for law enforcement officers who violate their oaths is special treatment, then we have a much bigger problem than one traffic stop in Louisiana. The interview went viral within hours. Donations to a legal defense fund that Jeremiah had established began pouring in from across the country. Military families, civil rights organizations, and ordinary citizens contributed millions of dollars in the first week alone. But the response wasn't entirely positive. Right-wing media outlets began attacking Maya personally, questioning her military record and suggesting she was part of a political conspiracy against local law enforcement. Death threats began appearing on social media, forcing Marcus to temporarily close his business and Malik to increase security at his college. The situation reached a boiling point when Camille Tran's home was vandalized in the middle of the night. She woke to the smell of smoke and found a 6-foot wooden cross burning on her front lawn, while racist graffiti covered her garage door. Her brother Marcus, a mechanic who worked the night shift at a local garage, arrived just as the fire department was putting out the cross. "Camille, you need to quit that job and get out of town," he said, his voice tight with fear and anger. "These people aren't playing games." But Camille's response surprised him. "No, Marcus, I'm not running. If I quit now, they win, and I won't let them win." Instead of backing down, she called Maya directly, asking for a meeting. They met at a coffee shop in the next parish, away from prying eyes in Beau Rivage. "Colonel Washington, I need to tell you something," Camille began, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "What happened to you wasn't an accident. It was planned." Maya opened the envelope and found transcripts of the recorded conversations, along with screenshots of Thibodaux' online activity that Elena had shared through back channels. "Deputy Tran, this took courage. Are you prepared for what comes next?" Camille nodded, though her hands shook slightly. "My grandfather fought in Vietnam. He used to tell me that sometimes you have to stand up even when you're scared. Especially when you're scared. Then we stand up together." The Pentagon's executive conference room had seen its share of crisis meetings, but the tension in the air felt different as Maya sat across from a panel of senior military officials. General Patricia Morrison, the Air Force Chief of Staff, led the questioning while others listened with carefully neutral expressions. "Colonel Washington, we need to discuss the implications of your current situation," Morrison began. "Some members of Congress are expressing concern about military officers becoming involved in civilian law enforcement controversies." Maya kept her voice level. "Ma'am, I was arrested while on personal leave in my hometown. I didn't seek this confrontation. Nevertheless, the optics are complicated. There are suggestions that your response has been disproportionate to the incident." "Disproportionate?" Maya's composure slipped slightly. "Ma'am, I was handcuffed and humiliated by deputies who targeted me specifically because of my race and status. The evidence shows this was a coordinated attack, not a random traffic stop." General David Harrison, a veteran of 3 wars and someone Maya had considered an ally, leaned forward. "Maya, we all respect your service record, but this situation is creating tensions between military and civilian law enforcement that could have broader implications." "Sir, are you suggesting I should have remained silent?" "I'm suggesting that sometimes the larger mission requires personal sacrifice. There are political considerations here that go beyond one incident." Maya felt the weight of institutional pressure bearing down on her. These were officers she'd served alongside, people who had praised her leadership and dedication. Now they were asking her to quietly accept injustice for the sake of political convenience. Generals, with respect, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. That document guarantees equal protection under the law. If the military won't stand behind that principle when it's tested, what exactly are we defending? The meeting ended without resolution, but Maya left knowing that her career was now at risk. Word had already reached her that her name had been placed on a conduct review list, military bureaucracy's way of signaling that someone had fallen out of favor. In Washington, Secretary of Defense Robert Walsh was dealing with pressure from multiple directions. Congressional Republicans were demanding that he rein in political activism within the military ranks, while Democrats were calling for investigations into systemic racism in law enforcement. Walsh had served in both Republican and Democratic administrations, building his reputation on avoiding partisan controversy. The Washington situation threatened to destroy that carefully maintained neutrality. "Sir, we're getting calls from senators on both sides of the aisle," his chief of staff reported during their morning briefing. "Senator Patterson wants to know why we're not disciplining Colonel Washington for inflammatory public statements. Senator Williams wants to know why we're not doing more to support her. What's the White House position? They're staying out of it for now, but the president's advisors are concerned about the political implications heading into the election cycle." Walsh stared out his office window at the Potomac River, weighing his options. Maya Washington was one of the Air Force's most decorated officers, with a service record that was beyond reproach. But politics was politics, and sometimes good people became casualties of larger forces. "Schedule a meeting with Colonel Washington," he decided. "I want to hear her side directly." Back in Beau Rivage, Sheriff Boudreaux was conducting his own damage control meeting. He had gathered his most trusted deputies, including Thibodaux, to discuss their response to the growing crisis. "The media attention is intense," he announced to the group assembled in the conference room. "We need to present a united front. This isn't about race. It's about respect for law enforcement and the rule of law." Deputy Davis raised a tentative hand. "Sheriff, some of the evidence that's coming out suggests the arrest might have been problematic." Boudreaux's expression hardened. "Deputy Davis, are you questioning the judgment of your fellow officers?" "No, sir. But the recordings, the social media posts." "Alleged recordings," Thibodaux interrupted. "Audio can be faked. Social media accounts can be hacked. We can't let ourselves be intimidated by a media witch hunt." Boudreaux nodded approvingly. "Marcus is right. We followed proper procedures. If Colonel Washington wants to make this about race, that's her choice. But we won't be bullied into admitting wrongdoing that didn't occur." He outlined their strategy: deny everything, claim evidence was fabricated, and frame the situation as an attack on local law enforcement by out-of-state agitators. Several deputies looked uncomfortable with the approach, but none voiced objections. "One more thing," Boudreaux added as the meeting concluded. "If anyone in this department is considering cooperating with outside investigators, they should remember where their loyalties lie. We protect our own." The message was clear: cross the department and face the consequences. While Boudreaux was circling the wagons, Jeremiah Thibodaux was building his legal strategy in New Orleans. His investigation had uncovered a disturbing pattern of behavior within the Beau Rivage Parish Sheriff's Department that went far beyond Maya's case. "Colonel, what we're looking at here is systematic misconduct," he explained during a strategy session at his law firm. "I've found 19 cases in the past 7 years where complaints against Beau Rivage deputies were dismissed or buried. Most involved black citizens, and several mentioned Deputy Thibodaux specifically." Maya studied the files spread across the conference table. Each one represented someone who had been wronged and then ignored by the system. "There's more," Jeremiah continued. "I've traced financial records showing that the police union has been paying legal fees for officers accused of misconduct across 6 parishes. It's essentially a protection racket funded by taxpayer money. Can you prove it?" "I'm working on it, but they're fighting back hard. Sheriff Boudreaux's attorney has already threatened to sue me for defamation if I make any public statements about ongoing investigations." "Let them sue," Maya said firmly. The truth is the truth. Jeremiah's investigation had also uncovered connections between the police union's legal defense fund and a network of attorneys who specialized in defending officers accused of civil rights violations. The same law firms appeared in cases across multiple states, suggesting a coordinated effort to shield bad actors from accountability. As the legal battle intensified, the personal costs were mounting for everyone involved. Camille Tran had been effectively ostracized within the Beau Rivage Parish Sheriff's Department, assigned to desk duty and excluded from normal operations. Her fellow deputies avoided her, and she found dead animals left on her doorstep twice in 1 week. But she refused to back down. Working with journalists and investigators, she had provided crucial evidence that corroborated Maya's account and exposed the department's culture of corruption. "I became a police officer to protect people," she told a reporter from the Washington Post. "Instead, I found myself working alongside people who were more interested in protecting their own power than serving the community. The stress was taking its toll on her family. Her mother begged her to quit and move away, while her brother worried constantly about her safety. But Camille had found something she'd been searching for her entire career, a cause worth fighting for." The case took a tragic turn when Deputy Jake Broussard, Thibodaux's partner during the arrest, was found dead in his apartment from an apparent suicide. The official report stated that he had been despondent over the media coverage and investigation. But Elena Rodriguez, analyzing the evidence from her Pentagon intelligence resources, suspected something more sinister. Broussard had been scheduled to testify in a closed hearing about the arrest, and his death conveniently eliminated a key witness who might have contradicted the official narrative. "The timing is too convenient," Elena reported to General Hayes. "Broussard dies 3 days before his scheduled testimony, and the only evidence is a hastily written suicide note that doesn't match his usual writing style. Are you suggesting he was murdered?" "I'm suggesting we can't rule it out." Broussard was reportedly nervous and told his wife he was being followed. Now he's dead, and the investigation loses its most potentially cooperative witness. Camille Tran, when she learned of Broussard's death, felt a chill of recognition. She remembered seeing Broussard in the days after the arrest, looking haggard and jumping at every unexpected sound. He had tried to approach her once, seeming like he wanted to say something, but then changed his mind and walked away. Now she wondered if he had been trying to find the courage to tell the truth, and whether that courage had cost him his life. The news of Broussard's death reached Maya while she was preparing for her meeting with the Secretary of Defense. The timing felt like another message: cooperate with investigations and face the consequences. But instead of intimidating her, it strengthened her resolve. She thought about all the airmen she had commanded over the years, young men and women who had trusted her to lead them through dangerous situations. Many of them had made the ultimate sacrifice in service to their country and its ideals. If they could give their lives for freedom and justice, she could risk her career for the same principles. The meeting with Secretary Walsh took place in his private office, away from the formal conference rooms where bureaucratic theater usually played out. Walsh was a career military officer who had earned his position through competence rather than politics, and Maya respected him despite their current circumstances. "Maya, I've known you for 15 years, Walsh began without preamble. "You're one of the finest officers I've served with. That's why this situation is so difficult. Sir, I understand the political pressures you're facing. Do you? Because I'm not sure you grasp how far this could go. There are people in Congress who want your head on a platter. They see you as a symbol of everything they oppose: military officers who won't stay in their lane, civil rights activists who won't accept the status quo." Maya met his gaze steadily. "And what do you see me as, sir?" Walsh was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the Washington skyline. "I see an officer who's been placed in an impossible position through no fault of her own. But I also see someone who has a choice to make about how this ends." "What choice is that?" "Accept a transfer to a non-controversial position. Take early retirement with full honors. Let this fade from the news cycle." He paused. "Or continue down this path and accept that your career may not survive the journey." Maya considered the offer carefully. It would be easy to take the exit ramp, to accept a comfortable retirement and avoid further conflict. She could write her memoirs, give speeches to veteran groups, and enjoy her grandchildren when they came along. But then she thought about Camille Tran, risking everything to stand up for what was right. She thought about Darius Boudreaux, whose quick thinking had provided the evidence that started this whole fight. She thought about all the people who had been wronged by systems that protected perpetrators instead of victims. "Sir, with respect, my career isn't the most important thing at stake here." Walsh nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer. "Then God help us all, because the storm is just getting started." As Maya left the Pentagon that afternoon, she carried with her a sealed envelope containing intelligence reports that Elena had assembled. The contents would change everything, evidence that the network of corruption extended far beyond a small-town sheriff's department in Louisiana. One name appeared repeatedly in the financial records and communication intercepts: Senator Roland Wexley, a powerful Republican with significant influence over law enforcement policy and military budgets. The arrest in Beau Rivage hadn't been a random act of prejudice. It had been the opening move in a much larger game, and Maya was about to discover that her opponents included some of the most powerful people in Washington. Following her meeting with Secretary Walsh, Maya knew she needed allies who understood the full scope of what she was facing. The sealed envelope from Elena had led her to an unlikely contact, Virginia Cross, a 72-year-old former CIA analyst who lived quietly in a Virginia suburb but maintained connections throughout the intelligence community. They met at a small diner in Alexandria, the kind of place where conversations could blend into the background noise of clinking coffee cups and quiet conversations. Virginia arrived first, her silver hair pulled back in a simple bun, looking like any other grandmother enjoying her afternoon coffee. "Colonel Washington," Virginia said as Maya slid into the opposite booth. "I've been following your situation with great interest. Ms. Cross, Major Rodriguez said you might have insights into the broader picture." Virginia's eyes were sharp despite her age. "My dear, what happened to you in Louisiana wasn't an isolated incident. It was a field test." "A field test for what?" "A network that's been building for years. Senator Roland Wexley isn't just another corrupt politician. He's the political face of a military-industrial complex that wants to federalize local law enforcement through private contractors." Virginia opened a worn leather portfolio and spread several documents across the table: bank statements, communication intercepts, and organizational charts that painted a disturbing picture. The contractor connected to Deputy Thibodaux's militia group, Sovereign Security Solutions, has been quietly acquiring law enforcement contracts across the South. They provide training, equipment, and what they call cultural consultation to police departments. Maya studied the financial records. Cultural consultation. Teaching officers to identify and neutralize what they consider threats to traditional American values: high-achieving minorities, military officers who might resist their agenda, community leaders who advocate for reform. They're building a private army within local police forces. Exactly. And Senator Wexley has been using his position on the Armed Services Committee to funnel federal grants toward departments that contract with sovereign security. It's a shadow federalization program that bypasses democratic oversight. The implications were staggering. Maya realized her arrest hadn't been about racial prejudice alone. It had been a test of the network's ability to target and neutralize specific individuals who posed a threat to their agenda. "There's more," Virginia continued. "The plan includes privatizing military police functions, border security, and eventually federal law enforcement. They're positioning themselves to control the entire security apparatus of the United States." As they talked, Maya's encrypted phone buzzed with a message from an unknown contact: "Check your secure email. Falcon." Later that evening, in the secure communication center that Elena had set up in a safe house outside Washington, Maya accessed the encrypted files from the mysterious contact known as Falcon. What she found made her blood run cold. Falcon had provided audio recordings, financial documents, and communication logs that connected Senator Wexley directly to the network Virginia had described. More disturbing were the transcripts of recorded conversations discussing targeted neutralization of specific individuals, including her name mentioned explicitly. "They've been tracking you for months," Elena said as they reviewed the files together. "Your family connections to Louisiana, your travel patterns, even your nephew's college acceptance. The arrest was planned weeks in advance." One file contained a chilling conversation between Wexley and someone identified only as the General, discussing how to handle the Washington problem after her arrest. "She's too visible now," Wexley's voice said on the recording. "But there are other ways to handle this: discredit her service record, plant evidence of misconduct, arrange an accident if necessary." The response from the General was equally disturbing: "I can handle the military side. She has enemies in the Pentagon who would love to see her brought down. Leave that to me." Maya felt a chill of recognition in the voice, though she couldn't immediately place it. Meanwhile, Jeremiah Thibodaux was making his own disturbing discoveries in New Orleans. His investigation into the police union's legal defense fund had uncovered a web of corruption that stretched across state lines. "Colonel, what we're looking at is a protection racket that makes the mob look like amateurs," he reported during a secure video call. "The same network of attorneys and financial institutions appears in police misconduct cases from Florida to Virginia." Jeremiah had filed a federal lawsuit not just against the Beau Rivage Parish Sheriff's Department, but against the state of Louisiana, naming multiple officials as co-conspirators in a pattern of civil rights violations. The lawsuit included Sheriff Boudreaux, Senator Wexley, and 2 state senators who had received campaign contributions from Sovereign Security Solutions. "They're fighting back hard," Jeremiah warned. "I've received death threats, my office has been broken into twice, and someone tried to hack our computer systems. They're not planning to go quietly." The pressure was intensifying on all fronts. Sheriff Boudreaux, sensing the investigation closing in around him, had made a desperate attempt to save himself by approaching Maya through intermediaries, offering a substantial settlement and a partial admission of guilt in exchange for dropping the federal investigation. Maya's response was swift and uncompromising: "Sheriff Boudreaux, the time for deals has passed. The American people deserve the truth." The rejection pushed Boudreaux to more extreme measures. Working with contacts in sovereign security, he began a campaign to destroy evidence and intimidate witnesses, but his desperation led to a fatal mistake. Virginia Cross had been working late in her home office, analyzing financial records that could prove the connection between Wexley and the Shadow Network, when she suffered what paramedics ruled a heart attack. She was found the next morning by her neighbor, having apparently died peacefully in her sleep. But Falcon's latest intelligence drop revealed the truth: Virginia's pacemaker had been hacked and manipulated remotely, causing the fatal cardiac event. The technology existed, and the network had both the resources and ruthlessness to use it. "They killed her," Maya said quietly as she and Elena reviewed the evidence. "A 72-year-old grandmother who spent her life serving her country. And they'll kill us too if we give them the chance," Elena replied grimly. The message was clear: anyone who threatened their operation would face consequences, regardless of age, status, or previous service to the country. Despite the mounting dangers, Maya decided to use the platform that her notoriety had created. She was invited to speak at the graduation ceremony of the U.S. Air Force Academy, addressing the newest class of Air Force officers. Standing at the podium where generals and presidents had spoken before her, Maya looked out at the young faces of future military leaders. She thought about her own graduation decades earlier, full of idealism and determination to serve her country. "Cadets, you are about to take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the assembly. "That oath doesn't come with exceptions for political convenience or personal safety." She spoke about institutional decay, about the difference between loyalty to people and loyalty to principles, and about the courage required to stand up for what's right, even when the cost is high. "Real patriotism isn't blind obedience to authority," she continued. "It's the willingness to hold that authority accountable to the values it claims to represent. You will face moments in your careers when doing the right thing costs more than doing the easy thing. In those moments, remember that your oath is to the Constitution, not to any individual or institution. The speech was broadcast nationally and became a rallying cry for military personnel and civilians alike who were watching the Louisiana situation unfold. But it also marked Maya as an even greater threat to those who preferred soldiers who followed orders without question. Meanwhile, Deputy Marcus Thibodaux had been trying to disappear since Broussard's death, but his movements were being tracked by multiple agencies. In a twist of irony, he surfaced in a small Texas town where he was confronted by a group of militia members who had initially seen him as a hero. "You're the cop who stood up to that uppity colonel," one of them said as they cornered him outside a gas station. But when Thibodaux broke down and revealed that he was running from federal investigators, that he was afraid of being arrested or killed, the militia members realized they were dealing with a coward rather than a hero. "We thought you were a patriot," their leader said with disgust. "You're just another scared little man who ran when things got tough." Thibodaux fled again, but not before one of the militia members recorded his breakdown and posted it online. The video went viral, showing the man who had humiliated a decorated colonel crying and begging for protection. Back in Washington, Malik Washington was making his own impact. His acceptance into Howard University had brought him directly into the halls of power, where he was documenting the legislative response to his aunt's case in real time. His social media following had grown to over 3 million people, and his posts about the intersection of military service and civil rights were reshaping public discourse. Young people across the country were organizing rallies and petition drives, demanding accountability for the network that had targeted his aunt. "Justice isn't something you wait for," he posted on his Instagram account alongside a photo of himself at the Capitol. "It's something you fight for every single day." His activism had made him a target as well. The attack in Washington, D.C. came without warning, 3 masked men who tried to grab him as he left his internship office. They might have succeeded if not for Capitol Police Officer Maria Santos, who recognized Malik from news coverage and intervened. "Stay down," Santos shouted as she drew her weapon, forcing the attackers to flee. The incident made national headlines and turned Malik into a symbol of young people refusing to be intimidated by those who would suppress their voices. The final revelation came through a hacked video feed that Falcon managed to obtain and leak online. The footage showed Senator Wexley at a private hunting lodge, meeting with Sheriff Boudreaux and a third individual whose face was partially obscured but whose voice Maya recognized with sickening clarity. "The Washington situation has gotten out of hand," Wexley was saying. "We need to neutralize her before she brings down the entire operation." "I can handle the military side," came the response in a voice that Maya now knew belonged to General Preston Kane, her former mentor and commanding officer. "There are ways to discredit her service record, plant evidence of misconduct, make her look like a disgruntled officer with a grudge." "And if that doesn't work?" Boudreaux asked. Kane's response was chilling, "Then we move to more permanent solutions. Accidents happen in the military all the time." The video exploded across social media and news networks. Public outrage reached a fever pitch as Americans watched elected officials and military leaders casually discussing the murder of a decorated colonel who had served her country with distinction for 3 decades. The leaked video changed everything. General Patricia Hayes, who had been quietly supporting Maya's fight, now had the ammunition she needed to take direct action. Within hours of the video's release, she had assembled a task force of military legal experts, internal affairs officers, and intelligence analysts. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hayes announced to the assembled team in a secure conference room deep within the Pentagon, "we are dealing with a cancer within our own ranks. General Preston Kane has violated his oath, betrayed his country, and conspired to harm a fellow officer. We are going to cut this cancer out." The task force included Colonel Sarah Martinez from Military Intelligence, Major Tom Bradley from the Judge Advocate General's Corps, and Captain Lisa Chen from Internal Affairs. Each brought specialized expertise to what would become one of the most sensitive internal investigations in military history. "Ma'am, Kane still has allies in the Pentagon," Colonel Martinez warned. "He's been careful to cultivate relationships with officers who see this as a political witch hunt rather than a legitimate investigation." Then we move carefully but decisively, Hayes replied. We have the evidence. Now we need to ensure it leads to justice. The task force's first move was to place General Kane under discreet surveillance while they built their case. They discovered that Kane had been using his position to access classified information about Maya's movements and military record, passing details to civilian contacts including Senator Wexley. Meanwhile, Falcon's identity was finally revealed through a carefully orchestrated disclosure. Lucien Graves, a former NSA operative turned whistleblower, emerged from the shadows to provide testimony that would prove crucial to the investigation. Graves had been working within the intelligence community for over a decade, watching the gradual corruption of systems designed to protect American citizens. The network's attempt to silence Virginia Cross had finally pushed him to act. I became Falcon because I couldn't stand by and watch our institutions be perverted by people who put personal power above national security, he explained during a secure deposition. What happened to Colonel Washington was just the beginning. They were planning to expand their operations nationwide. His testimony provided the missing links in the conspiracy, connecting Senator Wexley's political influence with Kane's military authority and the civilian contractors who served as their enforcement arm. Jeremiah Thibodaux was building the legal case that would expose the full scope of the corruption. His federal lawsuit had evolved into a comprehensive civil rights action that named not just the immediate perpetrators, but the entire shadow network that had enabled their actions. We're not just seeking justice for Colonel Washington, Jeremiah announced at a press conference. We're seeking to dismantle a criminal conspiracy that threatens the constitutional rights of every American citizen. The lawsuit included financial institutions that had laundered money for the network, contractors who had provided training and equipment for targeting civilians, and politicians who had used their positions to protect criminal activity. But the network wasn't going down without a fight. Kane, realizing that his position was compromised, began destroying evidence and attempting to intimidate potential witnesses. He used his security clearance to access personnel files of officers who might testify against him, looking for leverage to ensure their silence. His desperation led to a confrontation with Major Elena Rodriguez, who had been working closely with the Pentagon task force. Kane cornered Elena in a parking garage outside the Pentagon, attempting to convince her to abandon her investigation. You owe your life to Washington, Kane said, his voice carrying the authority of decades of command. But you owe your career to me. I've protected you, promoted you, given you opportunities that others only dream of. Elena stood her ground. Sir, I owe my loyalty to the oath I took, not to any individual. Colonel Washington saved my life because it was the right thing to do. I'm going to do the right thing for her. Kane's mask of authority slipped, revealing the desperate man beneath. You have no idea what you're dealing with. This goes higher than you can imagine. If you continue down this path, you'll destroy your own career and accomplish nothing. Then that's a price I'm willing to pay, sir. The conversation was being recorded by FBI agents who were now working with the Pentagon task force. Kane's attempt at intimidation only added another charge to the growing list of crimes he would face. Sheriff Raymond Boudreaux, trapped between federal investigators and his former allies who were now treating him as a liability, made one final desperate attempt to escape justice. Using forged documents and connections within sovereign security solutions, he tried to flee the country through Mexico, but Homeland Security had been monitoring his movements since the video leak. He was arrested at the border, his fake passport and detailed plans for establishing a new identity in Central America serving as evidence of his guilt and consciousness of wrongdoing. His arrest broke the last link in the network's chain of protection. Without Boudreaux's institutional knowledge and Kane's military authority, Senator Wexley found himself exposed and vulnerable. The federal grand jury that Jeremiah had petitioned for was finally impaneled, and subpoenas began flying to banks, contractors, and government offices. The network that had seemed untouchable just months earlier was crumbling under the weight of evidence and public scrutiny. Camille Tran, who had risked everything to stand up for what was right, was finally vindicated when audio recordings of Thibodaux's confessions were played in congressional hearings. Her courage in documenting and reporting the corruption had provided crucial evidence that prosecutors needed to build their case. I became a police officer to protect and serve my community, she testified before the House Judiciary Committee. Instead, I found myself working alongside people who were more interested in protecting their own power than serving justice. That's not what law enforcement should be. Her testimony was carried live on national television, and her transformation from a quiet rookie deputy to a national symbol of integrity inspired thousands of other law enforcement officers to come forward with their own stories of corruption and abuse. Meanwhile, Deputy Marcus Thibodaux had finally been located by federal agents in a trailer park outside Houston, Texas. When they arrived to arrest him, they found a broken man who had been abandoned by the network he had served. In exchange for immunity and protection, Thibodaux agreed to testify about the full scope of the conspiracy. His debriefing with Elena and FBI agents revealed the systematic nature of the targeting program, including detailed plans to expand operations to other states. They told us we were patriots, Thibodaux said during one session, his voice barely above a whisper. They said we were protecting America from people who wanted to destroy traditional values. But really, we were just thugs in uniforms, doing the dirty work for people who were too cowardly to do it themselves. His testimony provided the final pieces of evidence needed to connect Senator Wexley directly to the conspiracy: phone records, financial transactions, and recorded conversations that painted a clear picture of a coordinated effort to use law enforcement as a weapon against political opponents. The breakthrough came when Falcon provided investigators with access to encrypted communication servers that the network had used to coordinate their activities. The servers contained years of messages, financial records, and operational plans that documented the full scope of their criminal enterprise. Among the most damning evidence was a conversation between Wexley and Kane discussing plans to expand their targeting program to include journalists, civil rights lawyers, and military officers who had spoken out against corruption. Washington was just the beginning, Wexley's voice said on one recording. We need to send a message that nobody is safe if they cross us. Not colonels, not journalists, not politicians. Fear is our most effective weapon. The recording was played during a closed Senate hearing where Wexley himself sat on the oversight panel. The look of shock and horror on his colleagues' faces as they heard their fellow senator casually discussing the elimination of American citizens marked the beginning of the end for his political career. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came from decrypted files that showed the network had been planning to target Malik Washington as well. His growing influence as a youth activist had made him a threat in their eyes, and they had developed detailed plans to discredit or harm him. They were going to plant drugs in his dorm room, Elena reported to Maya during a secure briefing. Make it look like he was using his platform to hide criminal activity. And if that didn't work? She didn't need to finish the sentence. The files contained backup plans that were far more sinister, including scenarios that would have eliminated both Maya and her nephew simultaneously. The evidence was overwhelming, and the network's desperate attempts to destroy it only added to their legal jeopardy. As federal agents raided offices, seized computers, and arrested conspirators, the full scope of their criminal enterprise became clear. They hadn't just targeted Maya Washington because of her race or status. They had targeted her because she represented everything they feared: integrity, competence, and unwavering commitment to the principles they were trying to subvert. But their attack on her had exposed their entire operation. And now the full weight of American justice was bearing down on them. The storm that had started with a traffic stop in a small Louisiana town was about to reach the highest levels of government, and nothing would ever be the same. The federal courthouse in Atlanta had never seen anything like it. Media trucks lined the streets for blocks while protesters and supporters gathered behind police barriers, their chants echoing off the granite walls. The trial of Senator Roland Wexley, Sheriff Raymond Boudreaux, and General Preston Kane had captured the nation's attention like few legal proceedings in recent memory. Special Prosecutor Amanda Richardson had been appointed by the Justice Department specifically to handle this case. A former federal judge with an impeccable reputation for integrity, she understood the weight of the moment as she addressed the packed courtroom on the trial's opening day. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Richardson began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed chamber. This case is about the corruption of power and the betrayal of oaths. the defendants before you used their positions of trust to target an American citizen because of her race and her willingness to stand up for justice. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Jeremiah Thibodaux, serving as special counsel, presented evidence that painted a clear picture of conspiracy, corruption, and abuse of power that reached the highest levels of government. On the third day of testimony, Maya took the stand. She wore her dress blue uniform with full honors, her medals catching the courtroom lights as she raised her right hand to be sworn in. The symbolism was powerful, a decorated American colonel standing before her fellow citizens to seek justice. "Colonel Washington," Jeremiah began gently, "please tell the court about your service to this country." Maya's voice was steady as she recounted her 30 years of military service. From her early days as a second lieutenant through her rise to colonel, she spoke of deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, of airmen she had led and lives she had saved, of the oath she had taken to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. "On the evening of July 15, were you driving through your hometown of Beau Rivage, Louisiana?" "Yes, I was returning from picking up my nephew's college transcripts when I was pulled over by Deputies Thibodaux and Broussard." Jeremiah guided her through the events of that night, allowing her to tell her story in her own words. The courtroom was silent as she described the handcuffs, the humiliation, the mockery of her military service. "Colonel, during this encounter, did you resist arrest or behave aggressively toward the deputies?" "No, I did not. I remained calm and cooperative throughout, even when they refused to examine my identification or verify my credentials." "What went through your mind as you sat in that patrol car?" Maya paused, considering her words carefully. "I thought about all the young airmen I had commanded over the years and what it would mean to them if I allowed this injustice to stand unchallenged. I thought about the oath I had taken and what it truly means to defend the Constitution." Defense attorneys tried to rattle her during cross-examination, suggesting she had played the race card for personal gain, that she had exaggerated the incident for media attention. But Maya's composure never wavered. "Counselor," she said to Wexley's attorney, "I spent my career in places where playing any kind of card could get you killed. I learned long ago that the truth is the only weapon that matters." The most dramatic moment came when Lucien Graves took the stand. The former NSA operative had spent years documenting the network's activities, and his testimony provided the technical details that connected all the pieces of the conspiracy. "Mr. Graves," Richardson asked, "how long had you been monitoring the defendant's communications?" "Approximately 3 years. I first became suspicious when I noticed unusual patterns in surveillance requests targeting civil rights activists and military personnel who had spoken out against corruption." Graves detailed how the network had used government resources to track Maya's movements, gather intelligence on her family, and plan the traffic stop that would humiliate her. His testimony was accompanied by dozens of documents, recordings, and digital evidence that painted a picture of systematic abuse of power. "Did you observe any evidence that Colonel Washington's arrest was planned in advance?" "Yes, I have communications showing that Senator Wexley and General Kane discussed targeting Colonel Washington specifically because of her influence within the military and her family connections to Louisiana." The defense tried to discredit Graves as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, but his calm professionalism and meticulous documentation made their attacks ineffective. Camille Tran's testimony brought many in the courtroom to tears. The young deputy described her transformation from an idealistic rookie to a whistleblower and the price she had paid for choosing conscience over loyalty to her department. "Deputy Tran," Jeremiah asked, "what made you decide to record your conversations with Deputy Thibodaux?" "I realized that what happened to Colonel Washington wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of targeting people who didn't fit their idea of who deserved respect." Her voice broke slightly. "I became a police officer to protect people, not to terrorize them." She described the burning cross on her lawn, the death threats, the isolation within her own department. But she also spoke about finding strength in doing what was right, regardless of the personal cost. The prosecution's final witness was Marcus Thibodaux himself. The disgraced deputy had aged visibly since his arrest, his arrogance replaced by the hollow look of a man who had lost everything. "Mr. Thibodaux," Jeremiah said, did you target Colonel Washington because of her race? Yes, Thibodaux replied quietly. We were told she was uppity, that she needed to be put in her place. Who told you this? Sheriff Boudreaux. He said the order came from higher up, that we were sending a message to people who thought they were better than us. Thibodaux's testimony provided the final link in the chain of evidence. He admitted to destroying evidence, intimidating witnesses, and participating in a conspiracy that he now understood had threatened the foundations of American democracy. The defense case was weak and desperate. Kane's attorney argued that he was a patriot trying to protect national security from internal threats. Boudreaux's lawyer claimed he was following orders from federal authorities. Wexley's team insisted he was the victim of a political witch hunt designed to silence conservative voices. But the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showed money flowing from defense contractors to political campaigns. Communication intercepts revealed casual discussions of eliminating American citizens. Video footage showed the defendants planning criminal acts in their own words. During closing arguments, Jeremiah Thibodaux stood before the jury with the weight of history on his shoulders. Members of the jury, the defendants want you to believe that this case is about politics, about liberal versus conservative, about military versus civilian. But it's not. It's about right versus wrong. It's about whether we will allow people in positions of power to abuse that power against innocent citizens. He gestured toward Maya, who sat in the gallery with her brother and nephew. Colonel Washington served her country with honor for 30 years. She earned the right to drive through her hometown without being humiliated and arrested because of the color of her skin. More than that, every American has that right. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood with a stack of papers that would determine the fate of some of the most powerful people in America. On the charge of conspiracy to violate civil rights, we find the defendant Roland Wexley guilty. The courtroom erupted as the verdicts were read. Wexley, Boudreaux, and Kane were found guilty on multiple counts of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. General Kane was additionally convicted of violation of his military oath and misuse of classified information. Maya watched the verdicts with quiet satisfaction, tears welling in her eyes for the first time since the ordeal began. Not tears of pain, but of release. Justice had been served, not just for her, but for everyone who had been targeted by the network's corruption. 6 months after the verdicts, Maya stood in the Rose Garden of the White House as President Matthews signed the Washington-Tran Act into law. The comprehensive police reform bill included mandatory body cameras, anti-extremist screening for law enforcement officers, enhanced whistleblower protections, and federal oversight of departments with patterns of misconduct. This legislation ensures that what happened to Colonel Washington can never happen again, the president said as cameras captured the historic moment. It represents our commitment to equal justice under law for all Americans. Maya had been invited to stand behind the president as he signed the bill that bore her name. She wore her dress blue uniform one final time, as this would be her last official act before retirement. The ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery 3 weeks later was unlike any retirement in military history. Hundreds of officers attended as Maya was promoted posthumously to brigadier general, her service record reflecting not just her military achievements, but her courage in standing up to corruption. General Hayes delivered the keynote address. Brigadier General Washington reminds us that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what's right despite that fear. She faced down enemies of our Constitution and our democracy, and she prevailed. The ceremony honored not just Maya, but all the whistleblowers and witnesses who had risked everything to expose the truth. A special memorial was unveiled recognizing Virginia Cross, Jake Broussard, and others who had paid the ultimate price for their principles. Camille Tran had found new purpose in the aftermath of the trial. She was appointed to head a new National Police Ethics Board, overseeing reforms in departments across the country. Her transformation from a rookie deputy afraid to speak up to a national leader in law enforcement reform inspired a documentary that won multiple awards. I learned that silence in the face of injustice makes you complicit in that injustice, she said during her acceptance speech at the board's inaugural meeting. We have a responsibility to speak up, even when our voices shake. The Police Ethics Board implemented new training programs, screening procedures, and accountability measures that began transforming law enforcement culture nationwide. Camille's personal story became part of the curriculum, teaching officers that true loyalty meant loyalty to justice, not to corrupt colleagues. Jeremiah Thibodaux's legal career had reached new heights following the trial. He received a presidential commendation for his work on the case and used his newfound prominence to establish the Broussard Foundation, providing legal aid to whistleblowers and victims of institutional abuse. The foundation, named for Virginia Cross and Jake Broussard, handled hundreds of cases in its first year alone. Jeremiah's own redemption arc from corporate lawyer to civil rights champion inspired a new generation of attorneys to prioritize justice over profit. The law is only as strong as the people willing to enforce it, Jeremiah said at the foundation's first annual dinner. If we won't stand up for the Constitution when it's tested, then it's just words on paper. Major Elena Rodriguez returned to her intelligence work with a new understanding of her responsibilities. She was promoted to lieutenant colonel and tasked with leading a new unit focused on identifying and preventing domestic terrorism within government institutions. Her near-death experience in Afghanistan had taught her the value of life, but her work on Maya's case had taught her the value of principle. She quietly continued the work that Virginia Cross had started, using her position to monitor and disrupt networks that threatened American democracy. The intelligence unit she led became a model for other agencies, demonstrating how patriotic Americans within the system could work to protect it from those who would corrupt it from within. Perhaps most mysteriously, Lucien Graves disappeared again after the trial concluded. His immunity deal had protected him from prosecution, but it hadn't guaranteed his safety. One morning, Elena found a postcard on her desk with a simple message: "Freedom isn't found in light, it's guarded in shadow." The postcard bore a postmark from somewhere in Eastern Europe, but Elena suspected that Graves was much closer than that. Somewhere in the shadows, the former NSA operative was continuing his work, watching for new threats to the democracy he had helped preserve. Malik Washington had found his calling in the crucible of his aunt's fight. His memoir, My Aunt, the General, became a best-selling account of how one family's ordeal had exposed a national conspiracy. But more importantly, he used his platform to launch a youth leadership nonprofit called Next Generation Justice. The organization trained young activists in the principles of nonviolent resistance, constitutional law, and effective advocacy. Malik's speaking engagements took him to high schools and colleges across the country, inspiring thousands of young people to become engaged in protecting democracy. Justice isn't something that happens to you, he told audiences. It's something you make happen through your choices and your actions. His invitation to speak at the United Nations came when he was just 19 years old, standing before delegates from around the world. He spoke about the power of individual courage to create systemic change. The Beau-Rivage Parish Sheriff's Department was permanently disbanded, its deputies either transferred to other jurisdictions or dismissed from law enforcement entirely. The building that had housed the department was demolished, and in its place rose the Beau-Rivage Civil Rights Memorial Park. The park featured the names of everyone who had been wrongfully arrested or targeted by the corrupt network, along with the names of those who had stood up to expose the truth. At the center stood a statue of Scales of Justice with an inscription that read, "Justice delayed is justice denied, but justice served illuminates the path forward." The park became a pilgrimage site for civil rights activists and families affected by police misconduct. School groups visited regularly, learning about the importance of accountability and the courage required to challenge injustice. On a quiet Tuesday morning, 2 years after the trial, Maya visited Jake Broussard's grave in the Beau-Rivage Cemetery. She placed her Medal of Honor on his headstone, the nation's highest military decoration resting against the simple granite marker. "You tried to do the right thing," she said softly, her words carried away by the Louisiana breeze. "Now the world knows." Broussard's family had struggled with his death, torn between grief and anger. But the trial had revealed that he had been planning to testify about the corruption he had witnessed, and his attempt to do the right thing had ultimately helped bring justice. His widow had found some peace in knowing that his death hadn't been in vain. The ripple effects of Maya's case continued to spread. Police departments across the country implemented new policies and training programs. Federal oversight of law enforcement expanded significantly. Political candidates who had taken money from sovereign security solutions found themselves unable to win elections. Most importantly, a new generation of Americans had learned that democracy requires constant vigilance and that ordinary citizens have the power to hold their government accountable when they find the courage to act. The final scene of this remarkable story took place in a high school auditorium in Detroit, where Maya had been invited to speak to a gathering of students, teachers, and community members. As she walked onto the stage, the audience rose to their feet, their applause thunderous and sustained. She waited for the noise to die down, then raised her hand for silence. When the auditorium was quiet, she spoke the words that would define her legacy. "Don't cheer for me," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "March for what's right." The audience erupted again, but this time it wasn't just applause. It was the sound of people who had been inspired to action, who understood that the fight for justice never truly ends. It only passes from one generation to the next. As Maya left the stage that night, she knew that her work was done. She had served her country in war and in peace, in uniform and as a civilian. She had faced down enemies, foreign and domestic. And she had emerged victorious, not through violence, but through the simple act of standing up for what was right. The small-town traffic stop that had been meant to silence her had instead amplified her voice across the nation. The network that had tried to destroy her had been destroyed in turn, and the principles she had sworn to defend, liberty, justice, and equality under law, had been strengthened by the trial they had endured. In the end, Colonel Maya Washington had done exactly what she had trained her entire career to do. She had served with honor, defended the Constitution, and left her country better than she found it. The camera faded to black as hundreds of voices joined together in a chant that echoed through the auditorium and beyond, "Justice, justice, justice." And in that moment, the promise of America felt a little more real, a little more achievable, because one woman had refused to be silenced in the face of injustice. What would you do if the very system you'd spent your life serving turned against you because of the color of your skin? And would you have the courage to fight back, knowing it could cost you everything? Like and subscribe for more stories of ordinary people who refuse to stay silent in the face of injustice.